ask that guy a question. That made me a little nervous, but I'm glad that we managed to make that transaction with no limbs missing. I'm really happy to be speaking to you guys this morning, especially because I think it means that maybe I slipped the noose of being mocked by the improv guys from yesterday. So big thanks to the speakers yesterday for being such good sports. I can get my slides up here, we can get started. You know, I think one of the other reasons that I'm excited to be here, aside from the fact that you guys look fantastic, is that we're in this really, I think, exciting moment of the way of changing the way that we interact with information. And I think that that's been a bit of a theme throughout as we're talking about how do we cope as users and as designers with big data, with sensors, with moving interactions off of the screen and into the environment around us. Because for 30 years, we've been focused pretty much exclusively on the keyboard and mouse, right? That these are the ways that we've been looking at dealing with information, is that those have really ruled the whole thing. And now we've got this opportunity to sort of start to shift off of the keyboard and mouse. Oh, guys, I'm wrecking everything here. All right, hang on a second. Man, jeez, calm down, all right? All right. So what we're looking at here is the possibility of being able to use things like speech and things like natural gesture, camera vision, facial recognition, and predictive technologies like we're seeing with Google now, where the systems basically predict what we want before we even know that we need it. So all these new ways of dealing with information, and how do we cope with that both as designers and, as I mentioned before, also as customers, as consumers, as civilians in this world? Well, one of the things that we've sort of seen is that this may actually change the way that we even think about information. Because when you start to combine all these different physical interactions, we start to be bridging the gap between the physical world and the digital world in entirely new ways, which is a bit abstract. I've already shown you a little bit of my demo, but I want to show you what happens when you combine natural gesture, for example, and speech for a whole new way to interact with the physical world.
Expelliarmus!
Yeah.
Expecto Patronum!
Yeah, expecto patronum. We're talking about like spells, you guys. Say a word, make a gesture, and something over there happens. Only it's not magic. It's like digits and electrons moving. This is the physical interface to the digital world. Now, I don't know if you guys were paying attention there, but they were waving these sticks around in that little demo. I did some research. They call these things magic wands, it turns out. I found out all about them on the interwebs. And in fact, you can actually get them on the internet, right? So, you guys, this is my magic wand. There are many like it, but this one is mine. And I confess that I'm a little bit new at it. But the thing that intrigues me about that is not just this sort of new way to interact with the world, but the idea that we're compressing intent into action, right? That when we see things like the Harry Potter world, they just sort of think of something and make a gesture with this device, this technology, to make something happen. So I'm still getting used to this, right? And I sort of have to be careful where I point it. But let me see if I can make this work a little over here on these candles. All right, you ready? Delightus Illuminatus. Yeah, all right, pretty good. Oh, come on, you guys. What, nothing? All right. I can turn them off. Nocturnus. Yeah, all right, there's always one. There's always one that doesn't quite do it, right? Just like this little and See, one of the things with technology, right, and especially one of the things that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, is that sometimes this thing doesn't work, right? How do we fall back to sort of more, if we think of how escalators degrade to stairs without killing you, maybe we can still put a switch on these things too, right? That sometimes magic isn't the only way to make things happen. But the thing that I really want to point out with this is that this is a technology too. This is an infrared remote control talking to these LED candles, and it understands 13 different gestures. And the idea of it is to kind of compress the technology, make it work at a distance. So again, intent is translated to action as quickly as possible. And that's something I think that is useful to think about. But you know, it's like if we put the wand away for a moment, you know, sort of Steve Jobs said, and then sort of Apple took it back a little bit. You know, if you see a stylus, they blew it. Let's put our stylus away and see what happens if we have this kind of direct interaction just between us and the digital world. This is my friend Aral Balkan. He looks a little tired here because he's just come off of this 24-hour hackathon. You guys know what I'm talking about. You bring some code and maybe some gadgets, and if all goes well, after you hack on this stuff for 24 hours, you've got something to talk about. I do want to point out these wine bottles here at the back. He's actually on a yacht off the French Riviera on a hackathon called The Boat That Hacks. So if you're going to do a hackathon, follow this guy, apparently. He knows what he's doing. But to this hack, he brought a Kinect, his phone, his laptop, and a projector. And this is the hack that he put together.
So you're sitting at home on your sofa, watching television, and something interesting comes on, and you want to share it, say tweet it. So I walk up to my TV, and I just kind of wave at it so it knows I'm there. And then when something interesting comes up, I can just grab it, and boom, put it over there. I grab, and boom, I put it over there. So I'm just holding it in my hand, and I'm putting it on my phone, and that's my hack.
And yes, I want to be clear, he did this overnight drinking wine on a boat. So something about this that maybe, while it's sort of impressive and surprising, also isn't that hard. I mean, he took these like everyday objects, you know, a TV, the phone, a computer, a Kinect. If you've got an Xbox at home, you've got one of those in your living room probably. These everyday objects, and he just taught them really these basic interactions. You know, teaching the Kinect this, take a screenshot. And then, you know, you can walk around like you've got it here in your hands. But already it's probably on my phone, right? Touch to release. Two most fundamental, simple gestures of these two devices. And yet when you combine them, you get something that's really surprising. So I think one of the things that I'm getting at here is that as we get more and more ways to interact with information, that the machines can understand the environment around us, that we can combine things into things that are truly magical. And the design community has co-opted the words of magic and, dare I say, delight, without often delivering the wonder that those words imply. You know, we talk about it a lot. We're going to delight our customers with this really efficient web form. You know, maybe our bar for delight is a little bit low, right? And it's tricky, by the way, delivering magical, delightful experiences that exceed expectations, because our expectations catch up. What's magical today is just the norm tomorrow. The good news is that we are awash in the technologies and possibilities to create these opportunities to make interacting with information more effortless, more fun, and I think hopefully in ways that will help the world in ways more than just these sort of novelty tricks that I've shown so far get at. So why don't we deliver more magical experiences? Why don't we deliver the delight that we often talk about? I think one of the reasons is that we still think about it in terms of technology. I think if we start to think about it in terms of magic, instead of putting technology on the face of everything, it actually becomes a useful framework for thinking about new ways to deliver services to people. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this line from Arthur C. Clarke, right? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Another way of saying that is often that the technology becomes invisible, right? I'm going to take you back to 1982 when Alan Kay, one of the folks at Xerox PARC, who really developed the graphic user interface, was talking about that this was the goal back in '82, 2 years before the Macintosh came out. We want to make the computer disappear into the environment. And what he's saying over 30 years ago is that our goal should be to remove as much technology as possible from the user experience so that people can get as close to the content and to the action that they want. And that's really the idea, too, that I'm trying to get across with just this little magic wand gimmick. So how can we make things easier? That's something we heard from Erin yesterday when she was saying, you know, People want to use your product when it's easy, when it's pleasant, when it's fun. So the computer disappears, and that's really been this history of steady improvements in our user experience when you go from punch cards to the command line to graphic user interface to touch, where we have the illusion that we're actually touching the information and stretching it and moving it. All user interface is illusion, right? Just this thin layer of magic that we stretch out over the ones and zeros to make the thing comprehensible, because we could not even comprehend what's going on inside our computers. Directories and folders, illusion and metaphor to paper over this incomprehensible thing that's happening underneath. So how can we embrace that illusion? I mean, in a sense, we've been using misdirection and deceit as designers in creating user experiences so that they can match a mental model that we as human beings can understand. Or a kind of way to put it is that we've been embracing fantasy. Another thing from Alan Kay, from this talk 30 years ago, was that fantasy helps us to create this simpler and more comfortable world. So 30 years ago, one of the creators of the modern user interface said to use fantasy and magic as a tool to craft these user interface illusions. So perhaps our future is less kind of the sci-fi, technology-based vision that we often have and imagine. And maybe it's something that's a little bit more magic. Maybe it is about compressing technologies into sort of more humane devices and pointers like this, right? I mean, that's what this thing is about. It's an elegant pointer for a more civilized time, right? So how can we hide technology into physical tools that let us manipulate the digital world? And first off, where can we get one? Turns out you don't have to go to a place like this. Go through their different personalization options. Go through all the different models on the shelves. Truth is, you've already got your magic wand. Everybody in this room. It turns out, though, that the shelf where you got yours didn't look like this. It looked more like this, right? It's your phone and your tablet. I would say that the phone is the first magic wand for everyone. Or put another way, it's the first Internet of Things device for everyone. Yeah, I know, you're talking crazy. You guys know about Internet of Things. This is about singing refrigerators and bracelets that text you when you've got some bad body odor. It's not about those kind of gimmicks and gadgets and novelties for the rich. Really, at its base, it's the idea is, what happens if you take a regular everyday object and you light it up with sensors, smarts, and connectivity? In a real sense, the phone was the first everyday object that kind of got this treatment. It's already helpfully connected to a network, so that part was relatively easy. But it transformed the whole device in the way that we experience information, right, by doing this. Sensors, I would say, are the really new and revolutionary piece of this thing. The smartphone is the device that made sensor-based computing. Hey, listen to this song. What is it? To move interaction off of the screen and into the environment around us. Part of it, too, though, of course, is simply its mobility. The fact is that it was... Oh, you guys. I'm really sorry. My technology is really going crummy. I should have a magic wand instead of this pointer. I think I'm running out of juice here. And put that down and just run it from here. All right. So one of the big things is that it's available at the point of inspiration, right? So just at the moment that you're like, oh, I want to know about that thing, I can find out about that thing, right? So, and again, it's with the sensors that you can also, supplement that desire with these new superpowers. You can use the microphone to use Shazam. You can point the camera at text in one language in Google Translate and have it say right on the screen what that text is in another language. It transforms it right there. It's magic lens. Right? And this becomes even more powerful as we start to embed sensors in the world around us. We're putting sensors everywhere. Most notably on our bodies, right? But this experience tends to be mediated through screens. So this is an Apple ad, which understandably emphasizes the phone. But I think it's capturing an accurate dynamic, that the more that we try to use technology to build a stronger tie to the physical world, to our physical selves, the more we shove a screen in between us and the world. So on one hand, it really is making us more powerful. These things have enabled us to do so many new things in so many new ways. But in another sense, it's also wedging in between us and our surroundings. So even in traditionally social situations, we're heads down in our screens, isolated from the people we love and the places that we care about. And just a little sort of stat here for you, the average smartphone screen time, 3 hours and 15 minutes a day. Over 20% of our waking hours are spent staring into these little rectangles. You look at them over 200 times a day. So there's a dark side to this particular magic, right? The more connected we are, the more disconnected we are. I mean, we're missing stuff that's happening right in front of us. Right? We've all been this guy. Probably multiple times a day, right? We don't even know it. I mean, those of us who've been focused on creating engaging mobile experiences, I think maybe have done our job too well. Maybe engagement has been kind of a crummy goal all along, and we'd be better served just giving people the information they need and getting away. Something that Amber mentioned yesterday. Just like, how can we do this quietly? It's not always about soaking up attention, holding on to people as long as we can. That's not a service, because it's disengaged us from things that matter more. I mean, that's what Golden has been talking about for the last couple years with his no UI ideas. Stop pushing screens in my face. Let me be present in the moment. So if this has been sort of the big superpower of mobile in the last few years, it's also been its Achilles heel. Screens are always going to be with us, but maybe they can caption our lives instead of framing them, instead of absorbing our whole attention. So I'd like to propose that we find a new way to move from this idea of availability at the point of inspiration to actually interaction with the point of inspiration. If we see something, how can we engage with it more instead of turning away from it and tweeting about it or looking up something about it on Wikipedia? How can we find that interaction within the inspiration itself? And I think part of that opportunity, right, it sort of means that we're thinking about how do we push that interaction out of our phones and into the world around us so we can interact with anything. What does that look like? Well, Neiman Marcus just installed this mirror at some of its stores. They call it the memory mirror because it holds onto your image. So after you do a little spin, you can see your outfit in 360 degrees. Basically dressing room instant replay, right? Which also means that you can compare your current outfit to the one that you tried just a moment ago. Or even better, right, the mirror can show you your dress in a variety of different colors in real time. And then, I think one of the big activities, one of the things that you see often in sort of a department store environment is this notion of sharing your, what you're wearing, taking pictures in sort of crazy awkward angles, like, how do I look? Should I get it? Right? And this is sort of like, maybe the mirror can just take care of that. So afterward, sort of tap through your photos and sort of send it. It enables that behavior, but also makes it easier and sort of keeps you in the moment of actually engaging with that particular dressing room experience, right? Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but until very recently, this technology was only available to evil stepmother queens. Right? And I'm thinking that maybe it's time that we really raid the evil queen's castle for some ideas here, because we have centuries of experience of telling each other stories about what should happen when regular everyday objects light up with some sort of intelligence or power, right? I mean, centuries of myth and legend. What if magic could bring things to life to make us smarter or stronger or live longer, or sometimes just help out with the mundane details of our lives? What if objects could speak to us, share what they've seen, what they know?
Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either.
You get these things like the Sorting Hat from Harry Potter, right? It's this mind-reading wearable that knows you better than you know yourself, that can give you advice based on information that's not readily available to you. It's Google Now in hat form, right? Or household tools that are just smart enough to help us do the dumb stuff that we've got to do. We've got a Roomba for the medieval era here, right? So I'm not the only person thinking about this stuff for sure, and I do want to call out in particular David Rose of MIT, who wrote a lovely book last year called Enchanted Objects about exactly this idea of how do we take inspiration from these centuries of storytelling, these design patterns that we've already established to say, I know what a mirror is supposed to do when it's magic. and use that to inform the work that we do as digital designers as we start to bridge this physical-digital gap. So what else can magic teach us? Well, how about Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz?
There's no place like home.
So her magic shoes, her ruby slippers, give her the power to escape with a little bit of a rough landing for sure. But escape turns out to be this really sort of powerful thing that occurs throughout magic. Is how can I escape my current condition, my current emotion, my current physical location? Well, what if we update that a little bit? The Dorothy Project imagines the same thing using your shoes as a magic escape method. And here's how it works.
Going on a first date? Select receive a call, create a fake contact, and slip the ruby in your shoe. Now, when things get unbearable, click your heels together 3 times and answer that pressing phone call from your boss.
Oh, sorry, my boss is calling. I've got to take this.
Oh, I'll see you on Tinder. I love you.
Yeah. What's not to love? So, and more recently than Wizard of Oz, Staples had imagined another magic object for both escape and creation. You guys remember this one?
So N equals what? Josh?
Today we'll be performing a triple Hoffenritter procedure.
But you've never done that before.
That's okay.
Wouldn't it be nice if there was an easy button for life? Now there's one for your business. Staples. That was easy.
Totally solved the UX of healthcare right there, you guys. You can take note of that for your workshops today. But I mean, this idea that it's sort of like, oh, hit a button, solve that problem. I mean, this is something that's actually coming into production right now in a whole bunch of little tiny startups, really simple devices. This is one called Button. There are a bunch of others like it. They're basically just little Bluetooth devices that you hit them and they trigger some cascade of events. Using a service like If This Then That, which if you're not familiar with it, check it out. It's a really easy way to bridge physical and digital interactions like this. But the idea of it is that, you know, you can push a button and something will happen. So kind of the canonical Internet of Things example is that when you wake up, you could push the button to turn on the lights, start the coffee, start playing some music, kick off your morning routine. But it could also be things like put it by the door to call a taxi or an Uber, if you like really jerky asshole companies, to call one of those instead. Or send a text message to your family when you're home. I mean, and this is really the idea behind the Amazon Dash buttons too, which are these little, again, buttons that you can fix on the, in sort of convenient places. So on your washing machine, if you're out of detergent, hit that button and it will automatically order it and the stuff will arrive by Amazon Prime later. I mean, it's sort of an interesting thing about this too, right, is that this is a really kind of a prototype for Amazon. They're trying this out, but they found this way to underwrite the experience by basically putting advertising on them and saying, hey, Tide, why don't you pay for this experiment? This obviously isn't the way we would want things to work in the long term, where we're just sort of covering our homes with little brand labels, you know, or where we're forced when we run out of coffee to order just really terrible coffee, for example. But the idea of this is that we're kind of retrofitting dumb devices with the smarts that we can actually, again, move interaction to the point of inspiration. I'm at this thing, make the thing order the coffee, meet my need in that moment. Throughout this, really what I'm talking about is that we're creating this physical interface for digital APIs. How do we create physical interactions for these things? So far, most of us have been attaching our digital APIs only to screens. And suddenly, we have the opportunity to make the physical world the interface for these APIs. So the trend right now is to do this by simply treating the physical world as a data source for the most part. And you see this in examples like the Progressive Insurance Company, which offers a snapshot sensor, which plugs into the standard data port of any car that's been made since 1996. So if you have a car that's less than 20 years old, your car has an API. And by plugging this thing into it, it turns it into a talking, communicating, complaining car, right? For better or worse. Now in this case, Progressive uses this thing to make insurance premiums that are tied to your driving habits. Right? So in this case, you're making the world a passive interface that gathers data to optimize business process and costs, or perhaps to give transparency to customers about why they pay what they pay. And that's passive, and that's just fine. There are ways that you can even use this relatively passive kind of interface, though, to also give more active advice and information, in this case, to the driver. That's what the startup Automatic is doing. It uses a very similar sensor for your car to deliver a very different service. It's focused on providing actionable information and insight to the driver. So you plug in your sensor, and it syncs with your car. Now, its goals are to reduce environmental impact and improve safety. So it watches how you drive, and then takes note when you accelerate quickly, right? It gives you feedback. So they have this program specifically aimed at teens and new drivers, kind of a driving coach. But it doesn't just watch you, it watches the car. So it can decipher what that dashboard icon means and suggest how to fix it. Let you dismiss the alert once you do. So it's like this magic translator for your car. It empowers you as the driver. So in one case, Progressive uses theirs to give the company insight. Totally fine, legitimate use. In the other case, Automatic is using it to give the driver insight. And I think in both these cases, one of the advantages to these sort of passive interfaces is that it requires no particular new behavior for people. This is a project that I worked on called Propeller Health. It used to be called Asmapolis, and then they changed their name because Asmapolis. What it does is it helps people with asthma control their asthma or understand how well it's being controlled. And you just put this little Bluetooth sensor on your inhaler, and every time you take a puff, you're having an attack, right? So it's registering, logging that attack, the time and the place, both of which have these real influence and information on how well your asthma is being controlled. So it's logging that information, and then you get these very sort of compact summaries at the end of every day, or sometimes at the end of every week, depending on your condition, saying how well your asthma is being controlled and what you can do about it. So trying to give, sort of very boiling down all this information to really sort of actionable insight. And that's good and useful for the individual. That's good for me as a patient. That's useful to my doctor as well. But where this thing really gets powerful is that they're distributing this through clinics. So you could have like 2,000 or 3,000 of these things in a community, for example, and then start to gather this epidemiological information. Oh, an hour after people go through this part of town, we see an uptick in attacks. We can start to understand what the cause of asthma is in our community. And so one of the things about this, right now we're very focused on the individual, devices that help me. And I think one of the interesting things, particularly about as we aggregate this information, is that we can start to think about how do we change entire industries? How do we change social behaviors at a larger scale? How do we benefit society at a larger way? And again, not just sort of make these baubles and gadgets for the rich. How can we really change people's lives through insight and advice? So these things are all sort of these passive interfaces. And I would say these services are sort of the new crystal balls. If fortune telling used to be about celestial phenomena, now it's all about big data, right? How do we crunch and make sense of all this information? To listen for problems. Dad, hasn't taken his medicine, or he's fallen, or his glucose is low, or to signal change. Someone's just arrived at home, or larger scale change, like the Propeller Health example that I mentioned. These passive interfaces are sort of automagical. They're this black box. They just do stuff on their own without any direct intervention or direction from us as users. And I would say that's the current fascination. How can we use algorithms and big data to predict our wants and needs? From an interaction perspective, though, I think things get a lot more interesting when you make things not just automagical, but straight up magical, right? We leave a wake behind us in the physical world. The things that we do in the world cause an eddy of reaction, which means that if our actions are a source of data, they can also be a source of control. So this is where the Harry Potter stuff comes in. I make a physical gesture and there's a physical response. So in my automated home, I don't always need the light bulb to be smart. It's sometimes more magic if it simply listens for my cues and my explicit intention, where it extends my will. Right? So an example, for centuries, the military have used these sand tables as models of combat zones to get the lay of the land and run simulations. And of course, those things have naturally gone digital, where they've become much more flexible, but you lose the physicality of the scale of sort of the being able to see exactly what the conditions are like physically. So the Ares sand table addresses that problem by equipping a standard sand table, a sandbox really, with a projector and a Kinect camera. So you can project the landscape onto the sand or elevation lines, as you see here. You can use the Kinect to read the topography, the shape of the sand, so that when you move the sand, the digital model updates and the projection updates. So physical and digital are totally in sync. So the sand becomes the controller for the digital model. And then, you can project your war games or satellite images onto this little landscape and see how the troops and vehicles contend with it. Here's like a satellite view where you can actually see people running across your sand table live, right? So the key idea here is physical interaction with digital information. What happens if you treat information itself as a physical ingredient? And how might this help to make interaction with our mini devices more seamless too? In this case, bridging a simple physical technology, a dumb one, with a smart digital technology. What about two smart devices? Maybe how can sort of thinking about things physically lead to new digital interactions? That was a question that me and my buddy Larry Legend tackled just in a sort of a weekend hacking project, where we were just sort of curious about, how could we make our phones and our laptops happier together? So we put together this little hack that we call Happy Together. Here's how it works. Larry is in the studio, listening to music. Oh man, come on. Just can't win with these little remotes. I should be using my magic wand. All right, so Larry's in the studio, listening to music on his headphones here. On his phone, right? And here he is, on his phone. And so he gets back to his desk and he wants to listen to the music on his desktop instead. So how does he do it? Yeah. Just shakes the content, almost like a shaker, from one device into the other. And look how happy Larry is. Really all what it's about, pretty much, is just like, how do you make Larry happy? That's your design goal. But the idea here is like just really simple. It's like, I've got information here, I should be able to just shake it out from one device into the other. We've got this working with maps and URLs and text and photos. In this case with music, it just sort of shakes the song into your laptop and it just starts playing at that moment of the song. But with this idea, it has this notion that you're carrying the technology with you all the time, which is certainly going to be an important thing for the next few years, since phones have become such a center of attention and information for us. But what happens if we sort of put aside this idea of wearables and instead focus on, you guys forgive me for this, therables, all right? Therables are rooms that are smart, that are magic, so that the objects themselves can remain dumb. Jared Ficklin of Frog Design blew this idea out in a project called Room E.
Turn on the lights. Turn off this light. Turn off that light. Turn on these lights. Jared.
What it's showing here is that when you move an object in the way of the display, it sort of intelligently moves the information around to make room.
Let's order takeout. What did I order last time? Order that. Show me the backyard.
And here again, even though there's a projection, you can move things around and it understands when there's an object in the way.
Hide the backyard. Goodbye.
So the idea of therables is that the room is smart enough to know what's up. So instead of a bracelet imperfectly measuring your sleep pattern, perhaps your bed should be doing it, right? The smarter that you make the environment, the dumber individual objects can be. And that tends to make the world an even bigger canvas for interaction. I mean, what we're really talking about here is that the world becomes the interface. Because in this case now, it becomes even bigger because the digital world extends to more of it. It's sort of it's turning the whole thing into a surface. That really gets location marketers super excited, right? You hear them talking about iBeacons and you can see them start to drool, right? This is going to be awesome whenever you go anywhere, whenever you walk 15 feet this way. It's like there's a deal, there's a coupon in this direction, keep going, right? Actually, I've got a demo of how this looks. This is put together here. This is how that works in practice.
You can move the old-fashioned way. Century 21 provides gourmet cuisine. John Anderton, you could use a Guinness right about now. Escape from it all into Lewis.
Stressed out, John Anderton?
Need a vacation?
Get away, John Anderton. Forget your troubles.
I mean, that looks awesome, right? You guys, don't be a jerk, right? I mean, I think this is like this thing this is what, Amber is talking about. Like, this is begins to be sort of an assault. So let's sort of try to think about how might we use these technologies in ways that are a little less abusive to our users, right? That really actually help improve the fabric of their lives. So here's a better way to use that very same kind of beacon technology. Wayfinder is an experiment in the London Underground to help the blind and visually impaired find their way in the tube. So they've instrumented a station with Bluetooth beacons that track the user's location and offers directions. So this young woman is getting outfitted with just a regular headset. It's plugged into her phone for a trial run in London's Pimlico station.
Welcome to Pimlico station. Follow the ramp down to the ticket hall. Turn left and walk down the stairs. There are 9 steps. Bear right and walk forwards to the ticket barrier. You are approaching the barrier. You are approaching the end of escalator. Walk forwards to the end of the hall. You are now at the platform.
So if you embed sensors in the world, then the world can actually help you. Wayfinder is still in these experimental stages here, just this one station. They're beginning to expand. But the feedback from its testers is already pretty inspiring. Just a few quotes here. I felt empowered. I felt like any other commuter. My first steps to independence on the tube. Really transforming somebody's just everyday life in this really kind of foundational way. So digital information embedded in the world as a canvas. Now, these kind of variables examples aside, we will likely be wearing and carrying a lot of these gadgets and gizmos, which brings me, of course, to an example that Amber mentioned yesterday, which is Google Glass. Glass, of course, is defunct, and it never really got out of the prototype stage. I think there are several reasons that it never caught on, but I'd like to focus on one of them, which is that from the outside, at least, it always looked like an engineering project. See, we got these cameras and these little tiny screens and tiny processors. What if we just strapped them onto your face, right? Which feels like kind of the wrong question. Sort of starting with the technology and working backward and starting with sort of a human need. I think, Suzanne started the day yesterday by talking about instilling design thinking into it. And of course, one of the real themes of that is to start not with the solution, with the technology, but with the problem. So perhaps a better question to have started with was simply, what if this was magic? Going back to tropes of myth and magic, what might magic glasses do? There's a whole rich vein of stories about magic vision. Google might have started there. What if these were magic? And then how do we use technology to make that happen? In other words, start by designing for the thing's essential thingness. What does it do? How can we make that better? How can we amplify that physical role, contextual role, emotional role in somebody's life, so it's more in tune not just with its function, but its context. Because you guys, the goal is not to make things talk. The goal is to improve the conversation. I don't want a smart home. I don't want automation. I simply, those aren't goals for me. Those might be tactics, but that's not my end goal as somebody who just lives in a house. I want things that simply do their jobs better. Perhaps by better understanding this digital context that all the objects in my home now find itself in. But the idea is that we should bend technology to our lives, not the reverse. Make things more like they are. Make us more human. I think another theme from Amber's talk. That's the crux of magic, right? In Harry Potter, Hermione's beaded bag is magic because it's bigger on the inside. It can hold this impossible quantity. Its magic makes it more of a bag, enhancing its essential role. I had the good fortune to visit the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the tallest building in the world. And like a lot of tall buildings, it has these binoculars, these viewfinders for enjoying the view. Of course, you can use them as you would expect, but they also have this different mode that you can flip into to see what it looks like at night if it's the daytime, or daytime if it's at night. And also, what it looked like 50 years ago before Dubai even existed. So you can actually look out and pan through and look at what it looked like through this sort of time warp. So it's making this better thing, this magic lens. So make the technology fit the mental model we already have of how the thing works and boost it. So just a more mundane example, this is Samsung's induction stove. And as many of you might know, an induction stove doesn't heat, right? It doesn't have the red heat. There's no visual indication of its heat, I should say. So what they've done instead of having that heating element is just added these blue LEDs that show kind of how hot it is. It has nothing to do with the actual heating element itself, but it just gives this thing that rhymes with our mental model of understanding how fire and flame and heat work. So it's something that does something that I think Colin mentioned yesterday, which is it sort of brings some order and meaning by essentially lying to users in this case, right? That it's like these context-aware experiences need to reflect the lies that we tell ourselves about how the world works, rather than actually reflecting how they work. It's the folders and directories on our system that have nothing to do with the magnetic bits and bytes on our hard drives. That's part of designing for a thing's essential thingness. That's not always easy, of course. I think one startup did the what if this thing was magic thought exercise with a cup, and this is what they came up with. Say, that's juice. Wow, all right, so it's a cup that knows what's being poured into it. This guy's like, I wonder what happens if I put beer into it. And he's like, what? Yes, it's beer. And it's got this thing, so it actually can identify all these different things, and even individual brands can keep track of like how much caffeine that you're having or what your hydration is throughout the day. And even if it doesn't recognize it's like something homemade, it can still figure out what the nutrients are that are in that thing. And I mean, guys, pretty remarkable technology. I mean, it's like something that in moments can recognize the contents of this cup. I mean, I know Stephen Colbert was certainly impressed.
Wait. A digital cup that can tell me what's in the cup and how many calories and allow me to drink it? That level of information was previously available only on the can you just poured it out of. I mean, there are so many. Think about it. There are so many times when Vessel's beverage identifying technology will come in handy, like when you order a Coke, but it tastes kind of like a Diet Coke, but you're not sure. And perhaps other times.
So, I mean, what they're doing, right, is that they're just sort of combining, confusing this idea of data and insight, which I think we're seeing quite a lot. You know, connected does not mean smart, and smart does not mean good. We need to deliver on a real human need. I think that was the core message of Amber's talk, is that, you know, reduce the technology to the minimum required, amplify our humanity instead of filling us with this noise of data that we have to sort out. You know, right now we're prioritizing data over insight. I think it's a big problem for a lot of quantified self products too. You know, do all those Fitbit steps and extra data actually give you actionable information to make your life better? You know, how can we improve the data signal? Because this isn't working, right? Let's help people leave the house. Let's help give them remarkable insight. You know, I think Rachel reminded us yesterday that big data is for the machines. Give us the concise message, the small insights. It's not about the data, you guys. It's not even about the technology. You know, we need to sort of release ourselves a little bit from feeling that we are technologists, because this is not a challenge of technology. It really is much more a challenge of imagination. We've got tons of technologies all around us that are waiting to be tapped and combined in new ways, in the same way that Aral was showing with just sort of like these regular everyday things, that we can create these incredible new interactions. Now, a lot of the things that I've shown have been kind of novelties, experiments, and I don't want to suggest that that's where we should stop, that those should be the products that we're creating, because we've got bigger problems to solve than how do I turn on light with a stick from across the room. You know, it's like we've got, I don't have to tell you folks here in Oregon, we've got, you know, some real violence issues in this country. We've got water issues, climate issues, all kinds of problems that really are begging for design to bring to them. So my suggestion here is not let's create novelties and stunts. My suggestion is how can we start to experiment and play a little bit and find some things that really do work for investigating information and our immediate environments in new ways to draw real insight. And sometimes we will want to play a little bit. I think there's a playful side to this magic too, but there's also something that's more important as we think about this. You know, what are the human values we're going to bring to this? I just want to leave you with just a few, and then we can break and actually start making some stuff, and hopefully this gets you thinking a little bit about those things that we might make. Is, you know, let's, as I said, let's make technology that bends to our lives, not to our reverse. Let's make technology that amplifies our humanity and that strengthens social connection instead of putting a wall between us, even when we're sitting at the same table at dinner. Let's make technology that provides insight and joy, and not just data or novelty for the sake of it. And let's make technology that empowers the individual and the disenfranchised instead of the corporate and the powerful. And so you guys, there's so much that we can do as we start to think about this, of new ways to interact with the world and with information. I think it's just really an amazing time to be designing for the future. So this afternoon, you guys, do that. Go make something amazing. Thank you. Thanks.